Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. In this one I want to do some speculation about the upcoming Avatar comic Suki Alone. So we're about 3 months away from the release of this book, a month probably away from preview pages first coming up for this book. And if I do manage to get a review copy, it probably will be at some point next month as well. So before we have any extra information, let's do some speculation while we sort of still can, just based on the basic information that we have, which in the grand scheme of things isn't really all that much. What we have is, of course, the cover image here. Here's sort of the clean one from the back of the Toph comic, of course. So we have the cool cover image. It's Suki in the boiling rock with the sort of, the spirit of Kyoshi, just showing that, Kyoshi trained the Kyoshi warriors, and those skills have been passed down over the generations. Then we have the description. Even a Kyoshi warrior can find herself in trouble. Suki is captured by the Fire Nation and brought to the Boiling Rock, a grim prison in the middle of a dormant volcano. Separated from Team Avatar and her Kyoshi warrior sisters, she decides to build her own community among other prisoners. But it's going to take more than an encouraging word to build trust among so many frightened people. And beyond that, I think the only thing that's been said is that both Peter Wortman and Faith Erin Hicks, the creative team, they've both said that this one is much more of a sort of a heartwarming, moving. There's more emotions going on here. It's a little bit more of a, I suppose, heavy emotional story than some of the other books, mainly the one-shots, which Katara and the Pirate Silver wasn't really emotional. There was a hint at emotion in the Toph comic, but in general, we definitely haven't got much of that sort of thing. So straight away, the premise looks to be immediately much better here. We are going to have to deal with some emotion from Suki here. And straight away, I will say, I have the most hope for this out of the first 3 one-shots for multiple reasons. One, the character choice here, I think, is a lot better. Katara and Toph definitely make sense as characters to do one-shots about, but ultimately, unless you're going to do something big with them, we know most of their character traits, and so going for a very light story with one of our main characters isn't very interesting. With Suki, though, she only sort of joined the team right towards the end and had like a consistent run of episodes at that point. She's been used a lot more in the comics recently, so going back to sort of before her return into the story in Boiling Rock and just filling in some things seems like a really good thing to do. Suki is really going to stand out, I think, getting a book all to herself, in that because she's going to be the main character, she won't be overshadowed like at all by any other character. Sokka's not going to get in the way, the rest of the team isn't, Zuko's not going to be here to do anything like that. No, this is going to be, what does she do? Like, I suppose effectively, what is her plan for dealing with being in the Boiling Rock before Sokka and everyone else arrives? Does she come up with an escape plan on her own? Because we, of course, know Suki is also a leader character, that she is very, very capable. She's the leader of the Kyoshi warriors. Of course, she is going to be able to accomplish something without the others around, and that's what they're setting up here with this description. That she decides to build her own community among other prisoners. Now, what exactly does that mean? That's a little bit more difficult to say, but the big thing is obviously we compare what we're being told about here to what we know actually happens, and that when Sokka spots Suki and they kind of reunite, there's no impression whatsoever from the Boiling Rock that Suki has like a detailed relationship with any other person in the prison. She doesn't really interact with anyone else, obviously suggesting that whatever community she builds up here, something happens to them and she's either separated from them or something happens and she gets betrayed, or something along those lines. So she is, I suppose, not feeling particularly hopeful until Sokka is the thing to sort of bring that hope back, and together with everyone, that is the team that can actually escape out of the Boiling Rock. So I think that's what they're going to go for here, is showing how capable Suki is, and that if she can lead Kyoshi warriors and train new Kyoshi warriors back on Kyoshi Island and be as skilled as she was, in the episodes that we've seen her in, then yes, she could handle herself in prison. It's obviously not going to be a great situation, but she'll know what to do. She can make things work to the best of her ability in prison by forming, I suppose, friendships with who she can. And I'm wondering if the reason that the cover features Kyoshi here is obviously, to get across the Kyoshi warrior training and the sort of heritage of it, but like, is she going to be like training people or something like that? The question that I have really is it just Suki manages to find friends among the people around her and then it gets torn apart, or is it like she's basically trying to form like an escape attempt of her own and then it gets torn apart? That's probably the big thing that we probably won't know about until we actually see some pages from the book. It's hard to tell if there's really going to be that chance or not. But Suki, the type of character that she is, I'd assume if she sees any opportunity for escape, she would definitely go for it. And it really is dependent on what characters they introduce here. So obviously everyone's going to be a prisoner. The Boiling Rock is meant to be like the most high security prisoner. It's where they send the leaders of a lot of the factions and stuff like that. Because we learn in the Boiling Rock, the episodes, that only Suki was sent to the prison, not the other Kyoshi warriors who were also sort of captured along with her. Same with, Hakoda and so on. They sent, him as one of the leaders to the Boiling Rock, not the others. So this is meant to be your high security prison. So everyone here is sort of meant to be, I suppose, a noted criminal to some degree. So how does she go about forming a community with effectively, a bunch of hardened criminals, as we see? Now, I suppose this is where you bring up Chit Sang and are like, he's actually a pretty cool guy, and you sort of question the whole time, like, what did he do to get thrown in here? He's actually like fairly like relaxed and okay, you can tell he sort of knows what he's doing from a criminal point of view, but we never like addressed like any issue with like freeing him. We obviously haven't returned to him ever as a character. And you sort of wonder, like, is this just the Fire Nation? They're basically putting people in here for rather small crimes, and you're meant to kind of get that point across. It's just overly strict for the point of being strict because it's the Fire Nation, or are we actually going to see some hardened criminals? The community part tells me that this will be Suki, potentially, forming a community around people who maybe prison life isn't going to work too well for them. And so in the same way that the Kyoshi warriors were formed, because again, this is where I think Faith Erin Hicks is probably going to use her previous writing with Suki and also the Kyoshi stuff to her advantage, which is that she wrote Shells, and in Shells we get the story that is basically the origin of the Kyoshi warriors and why Kyoshi trained them and why they needed to be trained, and that it was basically so that the women of, Yokoya, I suppose, effectively we know at this time, could defend themselves. So she trained them. They then went on, to basically train themselves and so on. And I'm guessing we might see kind of Suki take on a little bit of that role, and that perhaps is why they're using the cover image including Kyoshi, because it's going to be a little bit of a weird dynamic if we go through this whole book and there isn't any flashback to Kyoshi or like reference specifically to Kyoshi. Like, I assume Kyoshi warriors will get mentioned, but Kyoshi herself, that's going to be a weird one in that, are they doing that just to help to sell the book, or is there actually something with Kyoshi in here? In that, like, will it be Suki recounting, like, this is what I heard, this is one of our legends on the island about something that Kyoshi did, and we sort of continue the style of story similar to Shells, but she's telling it to her community at the Boiling Rock. Something like that I can maybe see happening. Would she quite go as far as training? I'm not sure. But the question obviously is, like, who then interrupts everything and puts Suki in this position where she doesn't have anyone around her by the time Sokka arrives? well, obviously the warden would be one thing, and this is one thing this book I suppose has the potential to do, is to really set up like that Suki has an issue with the warden, and so when she goes after him, her big solo run, climb up the wall, like the super Suki scene, that has a little bit more behind it, because she actually wants to capture him, not just to make the escape happen, but because this will be my pleasure after what you also did to the community that I formed. It really depends on how hard they hit this, the quality of characters that we get introduced to, the impact that they actually have on Suki. But that will be something worth doing, I think. They could also do it where potentially like Azula visits the prison and she breaks up everyone in or around Suki, because I doubt we're going to have a focus on Azula in this book, but I wouldn't be surprised if Azula makes like a cameo appearance in this book. The reason being is that, of course, the reason Suki's in the Boiling Rock is because she was captured after being defeated by Azula back in Appa's Lost Days. And there's always been a little bit of a question surrounding like, oh, when Azula meets the rest of Team Avatar during the eclipse, she mentions to Sokka that, you know, my favorite prisoner used to talk about you all the time. You know, your name's Sokka. She thought you'd come back for her, but she's lost hope now, or something along those lines. The question was always like, wait, is she lying here to just like get an advantage over Sokka? Well, if she is lying, then the question is obviously, how does she know Suki's connection to Sokka? So, because that's the thing. Azula's only introduced in book 2, and the only book 2 episodes that Suki is in are The Serpent's Pass, which obviously Azula isn't in, and then Appa's Lost Days, which Azula is in, but Sokka isn't in. So she would never just see that connection happen in front of her. So I think at least part of what she says has to be true, that at some point Suki says something near Azula that makes it clear that she has hope that Sokka specifically will come for her. Because otherwise, all Azula really gets from the scene in Appa's Lost Days is that, okay, Suki knows that Appa is Aang's Sky Bison, because she mentions Aang by name. So she and the Kyoshi warriors have met Aang and the team before. Suki doesn't mention Sokka in this sequence. So yeah, you get the friendship with Team Avatar, but the connection with Sokka and Suki is not really there unless a scene between them happens. And this is where I'm wondering, like, with like regards to the start of this book, do we open up with just, boom, page 1, Suki is in the Boiling Rock and has been in there for a few days, and we'll start with her making her community? Or do we do actually the first couple of pages is Azula handing off Suki to the warden? And so we get a little bit of the warden action going on in this book. And so Suki says something to Azula right as she kind of, they leave each other's presence. That, I think, would be a reasonable way to do this. That way you get a little bit of Azula in the book. You really connect Appa's Lost Days to the Boiling Rock through, like, okay, it was at this moment when Azula dropped off Suki at the Boiling Rock. And then, of course, you get to have the warden dynamic with Suki. And then, over the course of the book, of course, you can have Suki, do her own thing. Maybe Azula comes to check up on her. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe just the warden is left with advice to make sure Suki doesn't plan anything. Who knows? But still, there are options to do things with the story. But the main thing is going to have to be strong character writing for Suki, really showing off her leadership skills, and that they're saying it's build her own community, like Suki's community. So they're suggesting Suki in the leadership position there, which fits her character. I'm excited to see her do that with the people around her. The other thing they say is it's going to take more than encouraging word to build trust among so many frightened people. So they're not really talking about like hardened criminals. They're more talking about like just imprisoned people here. So is she going to be the one to maybe form friendships with, like, I suppose, just sort of Earth Kingdom people who were probably like arrested just for like rebelling against the Fire Nation. So to the Fire Nation, they're like proper criminals, but they're actually just like relatively normal people who would be frightened in this type of situation. Like I suppose, are we going to get more of a sort of imprisoned, like a 106 type dynamic, but with Suki instead of Katara? That could actually be more of the angle that they go for with regards to the type of characters that you have Suki with, is normal people, but they're maybe afraid to move or act against the Fire Nation because of what's happened. Obviously, it's a little bit different when you have sort of the failed attack at the eclipse. The people get captured there. Like that's a little bit of a different dynamic. But this is I suppose it would be more of those people, and then I'm guessing they just a switch happens, and that's going to be the thing. How does Suki get separated from all these people? Do they just get transferred, or does someone betray them? That's going to be the key thing in the book. What is the drama that's added to this book? And that, like, they're talking about, it's going to be emotional. There's going to be like kind of heartbreak, heartwarming. Well, I guess you're going to have to play on that. Is just Suki connecting with these people, and then there being a real tragedy or whatever behind those people, however they're separated. I'd be surprised if we see like character deaths or anything like that. So I'm guessing it will just be a case of sort of Suki has hope because of the people around her, but it really does get taken away from her. And the only thing that kind of gives her back that hope is kind of Sokka coming to save her, of course, and that reunion as it happens. I think that's a kind of good way to do it. Obviously, it's going to take a pretty interesting scene to see how they do that with regards to ending the book on sort of the note of Suki on her own again, just waiting and hoping. How you do that while, highlighting the strength that she had to form this community around her, but that she doesn't quite see what she can do now that it's been like ripped apart. That's a kind of cool dynamic. Again, it depends on how they frame it. Like, they could always frame this from the perspective of this is Suki telling the characters in more of the present day what happened before they arrived to save her. And so you can actually have a little bit of Suki reflecting on what she felt like when Sokka arrived even more. That's another angle they could take with it. But I'm guessing, like the Katara and the Pirate Silver, it's set where it's set because the whole book takes place there, and it's not some sort of a weird framing device of like, oh, let me tell you the story of when this happened, and we flash back. So there's that. With regards to connections to the Boiling Rock itself, I think you have to include the Warden at some point, even if it's just a cameo role. He makes sense to be the main character that Suki sort of deals with. Azula is always an option, even if it's just a cameo. I don't think you need to make her a main character in this book, but a couple of pages at the start, or like the one who comes in to make the big decision, would be quite interesting. Chit Sang, even if it's just, again, a cameo in the background, it would make sense to just like include him somewhere. Maybe just him fighting with that bully guard who the two don't like each other. That would make sense. Beyond that, I guess, just in background, we might see some of the prisoners we saw in the Boiling Rock episodes, and that's really going to have to be it. Honestly, it's very difficult to try and predict anything else. Will we get, like, I think what people want, but I don't quite think we'll get, is like a proper Suki flashback. This, to me, would be the way to do that, because you're taking the title convention of character alone. And if you look at the two times that's been used before, Zuko alone and Korra alone, they have both been episodes that heavily feature flashback. Zuko, of course, it's like one of our first major insights into his past, and just his feelings about that. And then with Korra alone, it's what did Korra get up to in the time skip? will they continue that into this book? I think they could, because you know, it's maybe potentially going to be difficult to overly spend the whole 72 pages just fleshing out her dynamic with a bunch of prisoners that are going to be sort of ripped away from her. So potentially devoting a little bit of the book to Suki reflecting on her past, and you know, how she went from who she was from before to being the leader of the Kyoshi warriors. That's sort of the dynamic that we'd like to see. Is just like, has Suki always been this strong, or did it take something happening for her to become so strong that she became the leader? That's just the sort of development that I think Suki probably needs to be taken to the next level, and that the characters' backstories are very defining for them, like pretty much all of them. Add Suki to that list, and don't just have her be the strong character we meet in 104, but then we really don't learn much about her backstory. I'd like to know, like, when did she become the leader? Any specific events that led to that happening? That could be really good, and that would take this book, I think, to the next level. Like, I already think that just focusing on the Boiling Rock stuff and what the dynamic they're obviously going to go for, the one that's directly stated in the description, that's going to work well and probably just about be the best of the 3 one-shots. I struggle to believe it won't, surpass the other 2 books, just because of the character and, the situation that we're dealing with. But if they did manage to do that and put some substantial, notable, like, first ever proper backstory for Suki, that really would take it to the next level, and it would actually really set the stage for that is how one-shot should be. They should be able to do stuff like that, proper backstory for characters, like they've done before, like in The Search with the full Ursa backstory. Obviously, it's difficult to do that in one book, but you don't have to make Suki's backstory like super complicated. When you just want to know simple questions like major events that defined her approach and who she is, becoming the leader, those type of things. What was there, the previous leader before Suki, like, was that like a mentor figure for her? That sort of stuff would be very interesting, and maybe they will go into it. The obviously the tricky thing is that they're highlighting Avatar Kyoshi herself, who Suki, because of the timeline, Suki could not have met ever. But is this just a play on the idea that we are going to get sort of Suki's Kyoshi warrior backstory, and it will stem back into, I suppose, how the ideals of the Kyoshi warriors impact Suki, and how she will then apply what she learned in her own training, and then maybe training other Kyoshi warriors, to her community there. That I guess would be the dynamic that they go for over the course of this book. I think it's very difficult to predict anything else, in that the books are, for the most part, very focused just on the characters that they're focused on. In that the Toph book has, a little bit with Sokka and Suki, but again, even all of those scenes take place with Toph in the same scene. The Katara book had a small side plot with the other characters, but they really didn't go into it that much. So I don't believe that this would be the book where they particularly have anything else going on. Maybe if we do get a big focus on potentially Azula or the Warden, a few pages where you get their perspective about sort of what they plan to do to Suki, or to mess with her, or whatever they go for. That might be what they do, but I do think this will be properly Suki focused. I think that is everything that I have to say. Again, we can continue this discussion in the comments. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are heading into Suki Alone. What do you think the book will be about properly? How do you think they'll go about doing, like, her dynamic with her community? Do you think they'll include Azula, the Warden? What is the significance of Kyoshi, this kind of spirit of Kyoshi, being on the cover? Are they doing any Kyoshi warrior flashback story, Suki's own flashback? Because, to me, there's a significance about the name Suki Alone, with the other Alone episodes, you have to continue the quality. So let me know what your thoughts are, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.